The glass hit the marble floor of Lumiere restaurant a half-second after Damon poured the Bordeaux directly onto his wife Elena's face, deliberate, slow, unhurried, while Camille filmed it on her phone from across the table. 60 guests on the private dining floor watched a woman sit perfectly still, wine dripping from her chin onto her pearls. The chef's bell rang once from the kitchen. Nobody at that table knew what that bell meant. She did. Elena did not reach for a napkin. She did not look down. Her hands stayed flat on the white tablecloth, fingers spread, steady as two open books. The wine was still warm. It ran from her forehead down the side of her face, followed the curve of her jaw, dripped from her chin onto her pearl necklace, soaking into the silk collar of the cream dress she had chosen carefully that morning, the one her father had always said made her look like her mother. Damon set the empty glass down the way a man sets down a pen after signing something final. He straightened his cufflinks. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, not with hatred, which would have required some heat, but with the flat, unbothered expression of a man handling an inconvenience. "You embarrass this family every time you open your mouth," he said. His voice was conversational, measured. The couple at the nearest table stopped chewing. A woman 2 rows back covered her mouth with her hand. "So tonight you don't open it." Camille lowered her phone but did not stop recording. Her thumb adjusted the angle, making sure it caught Elena's profile, the wet dress, the ruined pearls, the jaw that had not moved. She pressed her lips together, suppressing a smile the way you suppress a sneeze. Badly, visibly, not really trying. She was wearing a red dress. She had chosen it the way someone chooses a flag. "You're being dramatic," Camille said to no one in particular, her voice carrying the tone of a woman who found other people's suffering mildly tedious. She set her phone face down on the table. The video was saved. She was done with it. She reached for her wine glass, crossed one leg over the other, and looked around the dining floor with the unhurried ease of a woman who believed she had already won the room. The pearl necklace caught the candlelight even with the wine soaking through it. Elena had worn it every day for 11 years. Her father had clasped it around her neck the morning she left for college, standing in the kitchen doorway of his house, smelling of garlic and cardamom and the particular warmth of a man who expresses love through proximity rather than words. She did not touch it now. She looked at the kitchen door across the dining floor, 30 feet away, cream-colored with a small brass handle. The chef's bell had rung once. That was the signal. She had been waiting 3 weeks for that bell, and now it had rung, and she let the sound settle inside her, the way you let something warm settle in your chest when you come in from the cold. But he didn't know she had already made one phone call. Rowan sat 2 chairs from Damon, turning his phone over in his hand, scrolling something that was clearly not urgent. He had not made eye contact with Elena once since they sat down. He had greeted her at the door with a handshake and a smile that didn't reach above his cheekbones. And since then he had treated her the way people treat furniture they are about to sell, aware of its presence, indifferent to its feelings. He laughed at something on his screen. The sound of it filled a specific gap in the silence and made 2 guests at the neighboring table shift in their seats. The cruelty of this dinner was not in the wine. The wine was just the opening gesture, the way a conductor raises a baton before the first note sounds. The cruelty was in the architecture, the way this table had been set, the people chosen to witness it, the document waiting in Damon's jacket pocket, the upstairs room already reserved for 9 o'clock. Damon had not stumbled into this evening. He had built it. And Elena, sitting with wine, cooling on her face in a restaurant full of people who were pretending not to see her, had known about the blueprint for 3 weeks and said nothing. She had married Damon 6 years ago when he was a mid-level real estate developer with ambition that showed up in every room before he did. She had walked into the marriage carrying everything, the startup capital from her own 10 years of consulting work, the industry connections she had built through deliberate, careful effort, the original LLC filing, with her name printed clean and black at the top. Damon had brought charm and vision and a particular kind of hunger that she had mistaken, initially, for drive. She had been wrong about what kind of hunger it was. The cruelty in private had always been quiet, a mocking correction at dinner parties, a sigh when she spoke to a room, a canceled trip explained with a single text message, no apology, no revision. It lived below the threshold of what could be named and above the threshold of what could be ignored, and Elena had navigated that band for 6 years with the same stillness she was deploying now, in public, in front of 60 people, with a stranger's perfume close enough to smell. "Your father," Damon said, refilling his glass from the bottle the waiter had left. He was building toward something. She could hear it in the particular leisure of his voice, the way a man stretches before he strikes. "What is it you always say about him? That he chose the kitchen life?" Elena looked at the candle in the center of the table. "He loved it," she said. "Right." Damon glanced at Rowan again. The shared amusement between them had a specific texture, the amusement of two people who have already agreed on the punchline. There's this thing, men say, about choosing. When they don't have any other options, they call it a choice. He picked up his glass. "I always respected you for not being embarrassed by it. Most women would be." "I'm not embarrassed by him," Elena said. "No," Damon agreed pleasantly. That's the sad part. She had not told Damon her father's real name in 4 years. She had let him fill the space with his own assumptions, had let him build a small and contemptuous picture of a man he had met twice and never asked a real question about. Damon's fatal blind spot was this. He was a man who believed that what he could see was all there was to see. He had smelled garlic in Nathaniel's kitchen the first time he visited and decided, in that moment, everything he needed to know. He had never revised it. He had never thought to. That incurious, self-satisfied certainty. The certainty of a man who has never been surprised by someone he underestimated was the one crack in Damon's foundation. And Elena had spent 3 weeks learning exactly how much weight it could hold before it gave. The kitchen door stayed closed. Nathaniel was listening. Camille rose from her chair. She moved around the table slowly, not because she had anywhere to be, but because she wanted the room to watch her move. She pulled out the empty chair directly beside Elena, not across from her, beside her, within arm's reach, and sat down with the confidence of someone claiming a space that had always been hers, and everyone had simply been slow to acknowledge. She crossed her legs. She leaned one elbow on the table. She studied Elena's profile the way a person studies a painting they are about to remove from the wall. "You should feel relieved," Camille said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, the tone of false kindness that is crueler than anything direct. "Honestly, this is the best thing that could happen to you." She reached out and touched the wet strand of hair at Elena's temple, touched it slowly, with 2 fingers, the way you touch something you already own, and pushed it back from her face. Elena did not move, did not blink. Some women spend years waiting for someone to be honest with them. You're getting that tonight. That was the first moment, the touch, a specific physical claim made in front of 60 people who sat quietly and let it happen. 2 tables away, a man looked at his wife, His wife looked at the tablecloth. Damon slid the document across the table from inside his jacket. It traveled smoothly on the white cloth, stopping precisely in front of Elena's hands as though it had been aimed. A pre-signed LLC amendment, pages thick, her name printed at the bottom above a blank signature line. Rowan closed his phone and looked up for the first time all evening, now that the moment he had come for had arrived. "It's straightforward," Damon said. "Your equity is being restructured. The business continues. Your name comes off the filing." He said it the way you explain a flight delay. Unfortunate, outside his control, simply the way things were. "Sign tonight and it's clean." Camille uncapped a pen. She placed it directly on top of the document with a small, deliberate click. Then she took Elena's hand and patted it twice, slowly, with her palm flat. The pat of someone burying a thing they've already dug the hole for. "It's better this way," Camille said, "for everyone." Elena looked at the document. The candlelight made the text jump slightly. She looked at Damon's signature already on the bottom line. Clean, confident, signed days ago in some other room where she wasn't present. She looked at the pen Camille had placed there. She did not pick it up. She lifted her eyes to the waiter standing 3 feet to her left, who had gone rigid with the specific discomfort of a person who has witnessed something they can't intervene in and will carry the image of for years. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" she said. Her voice was steady, quiet. The waiter moved, and the silence that opened in his wake was different from every silence that had preceded it. Not the silence of people pretending not to see, but the silence of people who had just heard something they would be trying to interpret for the rest of the evening. Damon looked at the unsigned document. He looked at Elena's hands. He looked at the pen lying on the paper like a piece of evidence. He said nothing. He picked up his wine. He checked his watch. What he did not notice, what he would not notice until it was far too late, was that she had never once looked afraid. The phone had been in a box under a stack of file folders, taped shut with brown packing tape, labeled in Damon's handwriting, Tax Docs 2019. He had told her to donate everything in the spare room. Casual, offhand, the way he issued all domestic instructions. Without looking up from whatever screen he was on, as though the logistics of their shared life were a background process running beneath the real one. She had gone through the room methodically and found it at the bottom of the second box, a secondary cell phone, factory reset, but imperfectly. One contact remained under a code name. A series of wire transfer screenshots sat preserved in the drafts folder, 26 months of movement, each one showing amounts that made her vision go briefly white at the edges, account numbers she didn't recognize, a destination institution whose name she searched for 3 nights in a row before the structure behind it began to appear. She had photographed everything on her own phone with hands that did not shake, because she had decided before she picked up the device that she would not allow her hands to shake. She had resealed the box exactly as she had found it. She had placed it back on the shelf. She had walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink and filled a glass of water and drunk the entire thing standing, without stopping. That was the only thing she allowed herself. The destination institution led to a holding company. The holding company led to Rowan. She had recognized the name at 2 in the morning on the second night, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. The house quiet around her. Damon asleep down the hall. She had sat with the name in front of her for a long time. Then she had picked up her phone and called the only person she trusted without qualification. Nathaniel had picked up on the second ring. He always picked up on the second ring. She told him everything. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough for her to understand. He was deciding not what to say, but how to say it without diminishing what she had already worked out on her own. "How long do you need to be ready?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said. "I'll start tomorrow," he said. "Don't do anything I don't know about," she said. "Never," he said. And she believed him, because Nathaniel Osei had spent 30 years building things for other people without taking credit, and she had never once seen him move without her consent on anything that was hers. The investigation moved in 4 stages, each one arriving like a door closing on a room she had hoped might be empty. The first confirmation, $4.2 million, transferred across 26 months, the documentation clean enough to take before a federal judge without amendment. The second revelation arrived through a former colleague of Elena's who still had access to certain industry filings. 2 of the transfer authorizations bore Elena's name, digitally rendered, not matching her actual signature profile on any document she had ever filed. Damon had intended her to be the liability in the room if the structure ever collapsed. She was meant to be the name attached to the fraud, not the victim of it. He had built that in from the beginning. The third revelation was Camille. Not as the woman in a red dress who had taken her husband, as the financial architect who had introduced Rowan to Damon at a private equity conference 38 months ago, who held a silent equity position in the same holding company, now receiving the transferred funds, who had designed the layered shell structure herself. The affair had arrived later, secondary, almost administrative. A way to keep Damon manageable, close, and motivated. Elena was not the wife who had been left. She was the asset the 3 of them had agreed to drain, divide, and discard. The fourth revelation was the one that required Nathaniel. The destination account had been flagged by a federal financial crimes unit 18 months ago, but never prosecuted, because the account holder's identity had been obscured behind 3 shell structures. Nathaniel's legal team, with access to the institution's internal compliance records through his board position, had unpeeled those structures in 9 days. They had the account number, they had the full transfer trail, they had the forged signatures, they had contacted the federal unit directly. The unit had been waiting for exactly this kind of institutional confirmation to move. She had texted her father the afternoon before the dinner. "I'm ready." He had texted back, "Good." 1 word, no punctuation, carrying everything. Nathaniel Osei had built Osei Capital Group across 3 decades without spectacle, without press, without the kind of visible display that invites envy or opposition. He was the controlling interest holder in 4 private financial institutions along the eastern seaboard. He sat on a federal financial oversight advisory council. He had mentored 43 young professionals over the course of his career, 2 of whom now ran firms larger than his own. He had cooked in his own kitchen every Sunday of his adult life and taught Elena her first recipe on a step stool when she was 9 years old. And he had never once allowed the scale of what he'd built to enter the rooms where he was simply her father. He had been working in Lumiere's kitchen for 6 weeks. Solange, who had learned the architecture of private equity funds under Nathaniel's supervision 15 years ago and now owned 3 of the finest restaurants in the city, had offered him the space within an hour of his call. She had asked no conditions and set no limits. She had said, "Whatever you need this building to be, it is." He had thanked her and arrived the next morning with his own knives. He had told Solange only this: "I need my daughter to be able to look at a door and know I'm standing on the other side of it." The chef's bell was their signal. He had installed it himself, a second small bell at the pass-through window, wired to a separate cord. 1 ring meant, "I see you, I'm here. Come when you're ready." Now upstairs, in the grand ballroom where Lumiere held its annual investor reception, the AV coordinator, a young woman named Priya, who had been Solange's hire and had heard, through the quiet channels of a small professional world, who Nathaniel Osei actually was, had already received the document file on a USB drive. The display screen at the back of the stage was ready. The federal investigator was at the bar with a glass of sparkling water he had not touched, dressed like any other guest. Two of Nathaniel's attorneys stood near the entrance in suits that cost more than the bar tab. Outside, in a dark car on the cross street, a representative from the Financial Crimes Unit sat with a radio and a folder and a court order that could be executed the moment the word came. Everything was placed. Nothing was loud. Damon had no idea. Damon was at peak confidence now. The specific overconfidence of a man who has planned something in detail and watched every piece fall into position. He was already mentally upstairs, already mid-toast, already seeing the room react to the new business structure announcement with the mixture of surprise and approval that he had rehearsed accepting graciously. He checked his watch again. He ordered a second bottle of wine for the table. He told Rowan at a volume Elena could hear without trying. "It's as good as done." Rowan smiled at his phone. Rowan had not looked at Elena once all evening. That omission, she had learned, was its own kind of language. He could not look at her because looking would require acknowledging her as a person with the same standing as the transaction she represented. And Rowan had separated those two things long ago to keep himself comfortable. Camille excused herself. She returned 12 minutes later in a floor-length gown, bronze-colored, fitted. She had retrieved it from the coat check where she had left it that afternoon. She had brought it specifically for this transition, for the walk from the dinner table to the ballroom. For the moment, she would stand beside Damon at the front of a room and be introduced as something new. She sat back down and placed her hand over Damon's on the tablecloth, fingers interlaced, unhurried, performing the role of what came next with the ease of someone who had been rehearsing it in private for a long time. "We should go up," she said. 2 more minutes." Damon looked at Elena, at the unsigned document, at the pen still lying on the paper. His jaw moved slightly. "The document," he said. Elena looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at Damon's signature at the bottom, at the blank line above her printed name, at the pen Camille had placed there with such careful deliberateness. And she reached into her clutch. Her fingers found the ivory. Envelope first, small, cream, soft at the edges from being carried for 3 weeks. She moved past it. Her hand closed around a second envelope. Thick, sealed, legal weight, the kind that holds things that have already been decided. She had placed it in the clutch that morning. She pulled her hand back out empty. "I'll come upstairs," she said. Damon's smile came back like a light switching on. He pushed back his chair. He stood and buttoned his jacket and said at a volume that carried across 2 tables, "My wife just came to her senses." A man nearby laughed the way people laugh when they want to be included in something they're not sure of. Camille stood and smoothed her gown. The woman who had almost left the private dining floor earlier, who had stood with her coat half on, who had looked directly at Elena across the room and then sat back down as though something had anchored her there, watched Elena rise from the table. The woman's expression was specific, not pity, not sympathy, recognition. Elena went to the restroom. She did not change her dress. She stood at the mirror and looked at herself fully for the first time since the wine. The dried rivulet at her temple, the stiffened collar, the pearls still at her neck, still catching light, unchanged. She turned on the cold water. She pressed her fingers under it. She touched both sides of her face. Once, not to clean herself, but to feel the temperature, to feel something present and immediate. She did not reach for a paper towel. She was not here to fix anything. She reached into her clutch and took out the ivory envelope. She had received it 3 weeks ago at her home. Address, her father's handwriting on the front, no return address. She had opened the outer fold and read the 6 words on the first page and stopped. She had been afraid, not of what he had written, but of what knowing it completely would require of her. She had been carrying that unfinished knowledge through every day since, through the phone in the box, through the late nights at the kitchen table, through every conversation she'd had and not had. She had brought the envelope tonight because something in her understood that she would need to finish reading it before she walked back into a room with Damon for the last time. She unfolded the second page now. It was a trust document, executed 7 years ago, before the marriage, before the LLC, before any of it. Her father had placed a protected financial trust in her name with a single condition attached. She would receive formal notice of it only if he judged, in his own time and on his own terms, that she needed to know the floor was there. He had written the condition in his own hand at the bottom of the page, not to make her dependent, but to make sure she was never falling without knowing something was below her. She stood at the sink with the document in her hands. The mirror showed her a woman in a wine-stained dress holding her father's handwriting. She held the paper against her chest for a specific number of seconds, long enough for it to mean something, short enough to keep moving. She folded it back. She placed the ivory envelope in her clutch. She picked up the thick, legal envelope. She turned off the light. She had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. She didn't smile. The ballroom of Lumiere was gold light and the low sound of money being comfortable. 60 investors arranged in clusters across the floor, the bar lit warmly along one wall, a stage at the far end with a podium and a dark display screen above it. The room smelled of good wine and the specific cologne of people who had arrived believing this was a night for celebrating someone else's success. Damon was near the stage already, jacket buttoned, Rowan at his shoulder, both of them carrying the ease of men who believe the room is already theirs. Camille stood close in her bronze gown, her hand resting at the small of Damon's back with the proprietary familiarity of a claim being publicly filed. Elena walked in wearing the wine-stained dress. She did not hurry. She did not look down. The thick envelope was in her right hand, visible, unhidden, carried at her side, the way you carry something you have already decided to use. At the far end of the room, near the kitchen service entrance on the left wall, Nathaniel Osei stood in his chef's whites. His hands were clasped in front of him. He was not moving toward her. He was simply standing in a place where she could see him, the way he had always stood. Present. Still, giving her the room to do what only she could do. She looked at him once. He nodded once. That was the entire exchange, and it contained everything. Damon saw her, and his expression opened into a wide and genuine smile. Genuine, because he was still misreading what her stillness meant, still translating it as defeat, as compliance, as a woman who had run out of choices and arrived to confirm it. He raised one hand. He said her name. He gestured her forward with the warmth of a man performing magnanimity for an audience, and 40 people turned to look at the woman in the stained dress walking toward the stage. Elena walked toward the stage. She passed within 3 feet of Damon. She did not look at him. She turned left and handed the thick envelope to Priya, who was standing at the AV station with her hands already ready, who took it and turned and opened it, and connected the drive inside it to the display system in 4 practiced movements. The screen behind the podium came to life. The room quieted, not all at once, in pieces, table by table, cluster by cluster, as the people closest to the screen processed what they were seeing, and the processing spread outward through the room like a slow wave. The document was clean, clear, specific. 26 months of wire transfers, each one dated, each one named. Damon Whitfield, Ardent Bridge, LLC, Rowan's signature, Camille's name in the holding company filings, her equity position, the date she had been added, and at the bottom, 2 forged signatures bearing Elena's name, enlarged, placed beside her actual signature from the original LLC filing 7 years prior. Different, distinctly, clearly, professionally different. Elena stepped to the podium. She placed both hands on the edges of it, lightly, not gripping. The posture of a woman who is not using the podium to hold herself up, but simply acknowledging that it is there. She looked at the room. She did not look at Damon. Her voice came out even, unhurried, the voice of a woman who has decided what she is going to say and sees no reason to perform the deciding. "His name is Damon Whitfield," she said. "The holding company is called Ardent Bridge, LLC. The total transferred is $4.2 million over 26 months. The 2 signatures bearing my name at the bottom of those transfer authorizations are forged, and the Federal Financial Crimes Unit is outside this building right now." 4 sentences. No raised voice. No trembling. She stepped back from the podium. The smile on Damon's face did not disappear right away. It stayed. Too long, too still. The smile of a man whose face has not yet received the message that his mind is processing. He looked at the screen. His eyes read slowly across the document, the way you read something you already know but need to confirm anyway. Then he looked at Rowan. Rowan was already turning toward the exit, moving quietly, not running, but moving with the specific purpose of a man who has already calculated his route. Then Damon's eyes moved to Camille. Camille had taken 2 steps backward, not dramatically. Just 2 steps, the automatic backward movement of a person whose body has processed the situation before their face has. She was standing with her back almost to the wall, her hand at her collarbone, looking at the screen, at her own name, in print large enough for 60 people to read clearly. Damon looked back at Elena, but Elena was already turning away from the podium, already finished. She had said what she came to say in 4 sentences, and there was nothing left to add. Nathaniel crossed the room. He moved with the unhurried steadiness of a man who has been walking toward this exact moment for years without rushing it, because the right moments deserve to be arrived at correctly, at the right pace, with both feet. He stopped beside Elena and placed one hand on her shoulder. He did not speak. He stood there. The room recognized him in waves. It started at the back, where 2 investors said a name quietly to each other. The name moved forward through the room the way a current moves through still water. Not loud, not sudden, but impossible to stop. People straightened. A man's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. 2 people stepped aside without being asked, making a space that felt less like courtesy and more like acknowledgement. The federal investigator came in from the bar entrance. Badge out, civilian clothes, walking with the calm forward motion of someone executing a plan that has been in place for weeks. He moved directly toward Damon and said something quiet, close, that only Damon could hear. Damon's chin came up, his shoulders shifted. He looked, for the first time in 6 years, like a man without a room to fill. Rowan reached the exit door and stopped. One of Nathaniel's attorneys was already there. Camille stood at the wall in her bronze gown and did not move for a long time. She was looking at the screen. Her name, the dates, the account structure she had spent 3 years building, displayed on a ballroom screen in front of 60 people who all now knew what it was for. Her hand was still at her collarbone. She had stopped performing entirely, and what was underneath the performance was simply a woman who had miscalculated, standing in a room where the miscalculation was written large and lit and inescapable. The silence before the noise lasted exactly 4 seconds. It was the loudest thing in the building that night. What followed was not dramatic. That was the thing about justice no one tells you. When it arrives correctly, it is procedural and quiet, almost boring. The wound closing is never as loud as the wound being made. Damon was escorted out of the ballroom within 7 minutes of the screen going dark. He did not shout. He did not make a scene. He kept his eyes down. He looked, walking out of that room, like a man the exact right size. Not inflated by the room's agreement, not buoyed by anyone's silence. Just a man, walking out of a building he no longer owned. He passed within 4 feet of Elena on the way out. She did not watch him go. Rowan's holding company was frozen by court order before 48 hours had passed. His investors called 17 times in the first 3 days. He returned none of them. He called Damon twice. Damon did not answer. Camille called Rowan 4 times across the same period. He answered the first one and did not answer the rest. The arrangement that had held 3 people together had needed all 3 of them pulling in the same direction to function. The moment the structure was exposed, the 3 of them turned away from each other with the specific efficiency of people who had never actually trusted one another. The video Camille had filmed at dinner, Elena's face, the wine, Damon's expression of deliberate satisfaction, was entered into evidence by the Federal Financial Crimes Unit as documentation of the coordinated, premeditated nature of the evening. They had planned the dinner as the final step. The video was Camille proving they had planned it together. The thing she had used to humiliate Elena became the thing that proved it was all one scheme. She had built her own case against herself and delivered it with her own hands, and saved it to her own phone and handed it to prosecutors who thanked her, formally, in writing. The woman who had nearly left the private dining room, who had stood with her coat half on, looked directly at Elena across the room and sat back down as though anchored by something she couldn't name. Found Elena in the lobby as the crowd dispersed. She was a journalist. She had been covering financial crimes for 11 years. She had a card ready before Elena could say anything. "I stayed because I knew something was happening," the woman said. Her voice was even, professional, but her eyes held the specific look of someone who had made a decision they were certain of. "I didn't know what, but I knew." She extended the card. "Do you want to tell your story yourself? Or do you want help telling it?" Elena took the card. She held it between 2 fingers and looked at it. "I'll let you know," she said. "Take your time," the woman said. "I'll be here." Outside, the night was cold and ordinary and unbothered by everything that had just happened 1 floor above the street. Cars moved. People moved. The city continuing its business with complete indifference to the specific justice that had just been served in a ballroom above a kitchen, where a man in chef's whites had stood by a door and listened for a bell. Nathaniel stood beside Elena on the sidewalk while his car came around. He didn't say anything for a moment. The cold air came off the street, and he turned his collar up. "You didn't need me," he said. "I needed you to be on the other side of the door," Elena said. He looked at her. He had the look of a man who has been given something he did not know he was waiting for. "Always," he said. She wore the wine-stained dress home. 2 weeks later. Early morning. The light came through Elena's kitchen window, low and gold, the specific light of a day that is not asking anything of you yet, that is simply arriving and offering itself. She was standing at the stove, in something old and soft, a shirt she had owned since before the marriage, before the LLC, before any room she had shared with Damon. The apartment was hers alone, hers in the way that things become yours when you have chosen them consciously after knowing the cost of not choosing. The ivory envelope was on the counter beside the stove, open now, the second page unfolded and lying flat beside the trust document, both of them visible in the morning light. She had read the complete note in the restroom of Lumiere, and she had read it again when she got home, and once more in the morning. Not because the words changed, but because they felt different, each time now that she was on the other side of what she'd been afraid of. The trust had been there for 7 years. The floor had always been there. She had been standing on solid ground the entire time she had believed herself to be falling. She was making her father's recipe, the one he had taught her when she was 9 years old, standing on a step stool at his kitchen counter with hands too small for the wooden spoon, trying to match the motion of his wrists exactly. Garlic softening in oil, the smell of it filling the apartment now, the low sound of liquid beginning to move. She had stopped making this dish when Damon told her, 2 years into the marriage, that the smell bothered him. She had stopped gradually, without marking the stopping, without deciding to, had simply made it less often and then not at all, had moved the recipe to the back of her mind and covered it with other things. She noticed now how easily that had happened. She noticed it and let it be a fact without being a wound. She heard her father's car in the driveway below. The sound of his engine was specific. She had known it since childhood, the particular sound of a car that has been maintained with the same care as everything else he tended. She did not call down to him. She turned the heat down on the back burner and reached for a second bowl from the cabinet. He knocked even though the door was unlocked. She had left it open for him, propped with the small ceramic doorstop her mother had painted. He came in quietly, with the quality of presence he had always had. A man who knew how to enter a room without claiming it, who understood that being present did not require being large. He set his keys on the table. He sat in the chair closest to the window without being directed to it, because that was the chair with the best light, and he had always sought good light in a room. She set a bowl in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it the way he had always held hot bowls, both palms flat against the sides, receiving the warmth deliberately, not incidentally. His hands were large and steady, and she had spent her childhood measuring things against them. Neither of them spoke immediately. The apartment held the quiet of a Sunday morning. No urgency, no performance required, just 2 people in a kitchen with food between them. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up in its ordinary way. A car starting down the block, a door closing, the sound of someone's radio through a window, the specific mundane sounds of people beginning a day that was simply a day, accountable to nothing dramatic. Elena stood at the stove. The smell of her father's recipe moved through the apartment and settled everywhere. The pearl necklace hung on the hook by the window. Clean, dry, restored. Each pearl catching the morning light one at a time as the light moved slowly across the wall. The way light moves when it isn't being asked to illuminate anything specific, when it is simply present. She was not wearing it this morning. She didn't need to. "It's good," her father said, meaning the stew, looking at his bowl. It's your recipe, Elena said. My recipe, he said. Your hands. He looked up at her. There was something in his expression that was not quite pride and not quite relief, something older than both of those, something that had been waiting a long time to simply exist without being needed urgently. Your grandmother's hands before that, same motion, every time. Elena looked at the stove dial. The flame was low now, a small blue circle holding steady at the edge of almost nothing. On the counter, the ivory envelope. Open. The trust document beside it. The journalist's card propped against the base of the lamp. The pearl necklace at the window, catching the light. She turned the dial. The flame went low, then lower, then out. She did not watch it go. She had already turned toward the table. The door behind her was still unlocked, but she wasn't waiting for anyone. Leave a like so it reaches someone who needs to see it. Share it for every woman who sat still when the room went quiet and knew something the room didn't. And subscribe.